This past 6 months has been an emotional roller coaster. From the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rayshard Brooks, and George Floyd, to the shooting of Jacob Blake, and the racial profiling of my very own college-bound son in my very own suburban neighborhood. It's almost been too much to take. So many times I've just wanted to stay in bed and hide under the covers. On top of that, those of us who are teaching while Black at predominantly white institutions have had added pressure of being the voice of our people. And those of us in positions of power, I use that term very loosely, by the way, we must be the voice for our untenured or unprotected Black and brown colleagues. I mean, it's been absolutely overwhelming. Then for me, a scholar of media and harsh critic of those who have butchered and battered Black images for generations, the straw that nearly broke my back was the death of our king, our superhero, our pride and joy, Chadwick Boseman. This may sound silly to some, but bear with me. Black media images have been distorted since the very beginning, since the birth of film in the late 19th century. The earliest film image of a Black man was Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom was benevolent and obedient and selfless, which made him worthy of sympathy. But that first character in 1903 was actually played by a white man in blackface. And he played it based on his own assumption and imagination of how Black men were. Then in 1915, Birth of a Nation changed the narrative yet again. It introduced the brutal buck portrayal of a Black man. He was lustful and dangerous and definitely not worthy of sympathy. All he was worthy of, simply put, was punishment. And this character, or should I say caricature, justified the terror and brutality against Black people at that time. You see, in the early 20th century, Black men and some women were being lynched and incarcerated for the smallest infractions. Sadly not significantly different from what's happening today with shootings and incarcerations of Black people. And Black actors and actresses of that time had to essentially take what they could get. Black women had to be heavy and jolly and obedient. They were not allowed any dimensions beyond the joy they felt in caring for the white family around whom their lives revolved. They had no backstory. They had no family of their own. And Black men also had to be jolly and smile wide and pop their eyes and slur their words. They had to sound Black, and Black had to sound ignorant and uneducated for the entertainment of white audiences. Now, as we moved into the era of television into the 1950s, the same images persisted. Beulah was the first television series to feature a Black character. She was a mammy, of course, and as I said, she had no backstory. She simply lived to care for the white family. Then there was Amos and Andy, a show where nearly all of the Black male characters were buffoons. Even those who held professional positions like doctors and lawyers were buffoons. But as the 50s progressed into the 60s, Sidney Poitier hit the film scene and showed that Black men could be dignified characters. The only problem is that's pretty much all he was. I mean, it was still a one-dimensional perspective of Black men. He was almost always good and never particularly complex, and definitely not sexual, because Black men's sexuality was always perceived as dangerous. Now fast forward to the 80s and 90s, and there was Denzel Washington. His characters did have complexity and edge, mostly good, but not solely. Yet his only win for Best Actor in a film was for a ruthless, narcissistic, dirty black cop. Think about that. Of course, there are other actors that I'm not mentioning who played strong and complex characters who were three-dimensional in their full sexuality and who they were. And then black women in film and television have also had limited roles and one-dimensional roles, but many have sought to show the complexity and compassion on the big and small screen. Actresses like Angela Bassett and Felicia Rashad, Cicely Tyson, Octavia Spencer, Viola Davis, and so many others. But you may be asking, why does all of this matter? And how does it relate to the current state of race relations in this country? It matters because black images matter. And because since the beginning of film and television, black media images have shaped perceptions of black people and in turn shaped the treatment of black people by a variety of institutions, not just limited to the educational system and the criminal justice system, but across the board in terms of the limitations that have been placed on black people. And then, of course, the presumed criminality of black men has been all over film and television for decades, in nearly every dramatic series. When they weren't being portrayed as comic relief, they were being portrayed as someone to be feared. Chadwick Boseman understood that, and he honored that by making sure never to choose roles that did not complicate our understanding of and our existence as black people. From early in his career, he chose carefully and wisely what roles he would accept or even audition for. That is why we honor him, and that is why we call him a king, even though his character was a fictional king. And we call him a superhero, even though his character was a fictional hero. We call him that because he showed us characters that we often did not get a chance to see. He showed us ourselves in all of our potential and glory. He loved us, and he showed us that he loved us through the character selections and the characters he chose to portray. See, Hollywood can be a cruel and unusual place, and it can suck the life and the humanity out of you if you let it. But he didn't. So again, I say all of this to say black images matter. Now more than ever, because black men and women are dying based on the assumption that we are somehow more dangerous and more inherently lawless than others. And one of the things that I'm hoping this movement that we are in right now inspires is more opportunities for black creators to have their voices heard and have their stories told, because black media images matter. Now the question is, what can we do? Well, I have a couple of suggestions. Black creators, stop giving in to the pressure to make your characters appeal to the white imagination. Make them real. Make them like your aunties and uncles and cousins and in-laws and co-workers. Make them real and make them three-dimensional. They don't have to be all good. They certainly shouldn't be all bad. They should be human. And audiences, when black stories are told, support them. There are some excellent emerging writers, directors, actors, and producers who need our support in order to get their work funded. So support black stories, support black voices, because black media images matter.